It was the third time they bombed Zarville that month. FD had been on his way to settle a score with someone who owed him a thick buck when the air raid siren slithered reluctantly out of the loudspeakers bolted to every street corner. It drilled into the skulls of the few pedestrians still outside, long and dull, like a screw slowly twisting through bone. The sky sagged like a damp sheet, pregnant with rain clinging to the bellies of low-slung clouds. Not that it ever stopped the cruise of the battle airships. Most likely, the governor of the 6th district had decided once again to remind the Outlanders why turning away his tax collectors 2 years ago was a bad idea. And so, Zarville, like every other rebel city, got its share of steel candies, marzipan filled with explosives. From the city's outskirts came the syncopated thump of anti-aircraft guns, trying to keep time with the grim orchestra of the raid. The sirens, the distant droning of engines, and the steadily rising crescendo of explosions. FD wondered what the hell they were aiming at. The airships always floated high above the clouds, and the last working raider in Zarville had been blasted to scrap 3 weeks ago. But then again, an airship is a big target. Maybe if you fire enough lead into the sky, you'll hit something, even if you're just aiming at the sound of the engine. The nearest entrance to the underground shelter system was 3 blocks away, right next to the Cluster's workshop, which conveniently was exactly where FD was headed. Chances were Cluster was already down below, sitting at one of the long tables on the sub-level 1, calmly pulling a deck of cards from that overpriced leather case of his, one of his own crafts. Rumor had it the case was stitched from the hide of a corpseling, one of the down from the Great Incursion 4 years ago, and the bone clasps were supposedly carved from the skull fragments or finger joints. But FD knew better. That corpseling had spent its living days mooing, chewing cud, giving milk, and occasionally kicking sleepy herders in the ribs. Oh, he knew. He'd been the one who sold Cluster a dozen well-tanned cowhides, looted from a trashed inter-district guild caravan. But then, what does he care about idiots who believe such nonsense and let their guard down by those creepy tales, allowing Cluster to rip them off at cards? The humming of the airships grew louder. The syncopated rhythm of the flag bursts disintegrated into pure chaos. It was like a drummer ditching the beat and trying to swat a swarm of bass-throated mosquitoes hovering over his kit. The time for a thoughtful easy walk was over. FD broke into a run, cutting through the thickening noise, heading straight for the familiar sign above the corner entrance of a 4-story brick building. Bags, cases, belts. Cluster and Company. Not that there'd ever been a company, but Cluster thought it made him sound more legit. Tucked just around the back of the building was the unmarked entrance to the underground. It was hard to find unless you knew where to look. Hidden neatly behind a massive fire barrel filled with rainwater and rust. FD turned down the now completely deserted street, sprinting for that sacred hole in the ground, unaware that he was in a dead heat with a 300-kilo bomb, both of them aiming for nearly the exact same spot on the city map. He heard the rising whine in the sky, sure, but chose to ignore it. What was the point? You can't really dodge the bomb. In Zarville, everyone had to flip a coin with death from time to time. He was maybe 50 steps away from the entrance when the bomb beat him there, turning the neighboring building into a massive splatter of flame, glass, and pulverized brick. Somehow, Miraculously, not a single chunk of that burning downpour found its way onto his head or spine. Instead, Avdi ended up on all fours, definite and dazed, trying to shake out of his head the sound of every cathedral bell in the world ringing at once, assuming any of those cathedrals were still standing. Through that thunderous haze, he could just barely make out the ongoing wail and crash, the voices of machines and fire merging into a kind of war chant. When he finally lifted his head, he saw several fresh columns of smoke stretching curly fingers up toward the low clouds. He had to get off the street. Avdi stumbled to his feet, one leg at a time, and hobbled toward the hidden underground entrance. His ringing mind noted, with a kind of detached indifference, that Cluster's workshop had somehow mostly survived. The northern half of the building was now a smoldering pile of bricks and rubble, but the shop was still standing. All the windows had blown out, and the mannequins and sample pieces from the front display had been flung out into the street like discarded puppets. Cluster gonna be swearing up a storm, Avdi thought. The city council would no doubt cough up some compensation for the late air raid alert, but it wouldn't come close to covering the losses. And if the patrol didn't show up soon, looters would strip the place clean by night. Damn it, that's gonna hit me too, Avdi realized, stepping carefully over the strewn scraps of leather and shards of glass crunching under his boots. Cluster still owed him 3,000, and now every tenner the old leatherworker had was going to count. All right, he told himself. Half maybe. If he can give me at least half, I'll figure out the rest somehow. But if he didn't have that half, well, then it wouldn't be his problem anymore. It would be Big Kier's. And Big Kier don't give more time or second chances. One of the mannequins, twisted, broken, limbs jetting at impossible angles like a rag doll, slammed against the floor and then stomped on for a good measure, lay sprawled across the heavy iron hatch that marked the entrance to the underground. Avdi grabbed it by the leg and started dragging it aside. Why the hell is this thing so heavy? He thought. Does Cluster stuff these things with sand so no one steals them? The mannequin left a smeared trail through the settling dust. Avdi, half aware, looked over the jacket. An excellent piece, with embossed patterns and fringe across the shoulders. He paused. That was Cluster's jacket. The one he wore all the time, swore he'd never sell. Did he finally make a second piece? Curiosity flared up, hotter than fear. Avdi braced himself and heaved the mannequin over to get a better look at the jacket. The head rolled with a nasty thunk, face up. Bloodied, smeared with ash and grime, and staring straight at him through a mask of filth and dried blood were Cluster's bright blue eyes, lifeless, wide open. Avdi didn't even have time to register the shock before something else caught his eye, something worse. Around Cluster's neck was a life receiver, gleaming faintly with its cold blue metal. And just beneath the Adam's apple, burned into the skin, was a charred mark. FZCU, First Zarville Credit Union. So Cluster had taken out a serious loan. And now he was dead, which meant every second of life he hadn't lived, every year, month, every single day coin had been claimed, transferred, repossessed by the bank. Just like Avdi's life would become the property of Big Kier, or, as he was known in business circles, the Third Eternal, if he didn't repay the 1500 days he'd borrowed a month ago by tomorrow morning. FD didn't bother lingering on the first sublevel, the designated shelter zone for waiting out air raids or the occasional corpsling incursion. Instead, he took the elevator straight down to level 5, the entertainment district. It was all restaurants, brothels, gun shops, liquor stalls, and hotels both sleazy and borderline respectable. Everything that was too expensive, too troublesome to rebuild every time the surface went to hell, so their owners decided to go underground full-time. He moved through the flashy chaos of underground life like a ghost, ignoring the winks from working girls, the sleeve-tugging hawkers, the laser stare of pickpockets, and dealers pushing home-cooked poisons. None of it mattered. Not anymore. Unreal life. Or maybe it wasn't that the world had become unreal. Maybe he had. There was no way out. 1500 days. Honestly, it wasn't that much of a deal. Not a huge debt by any means. But no bank, no pawn shop, not even the filthiest, most cold-blooded shark in the sub-city would give a single tick of time to someone who owed the third eternal. One of the 5. The ones who controlled the system. Life in, life out. FD's hand moved to the life receiver ring on his neck. Lately, this gesture became such a deep habit for him, he barely noticed what he was doing. Big Kir's rules were simple. Brutally simple. No contracts full of clauses and obligations. No hidden fees. No fine print. You took whatever amount you needed. And you paid it back. On time, to the second. Or earlier, if you could. No interest. Sound like a good deal. But there was a catch. There's always a catch. If you were late, by even a fraction of a second, the life receiver would activate. A focused beam would cook your brain from the inside, and every remaining second of your life would transfer directly to the third eternal, making him just a little more eternal. Of course, he didn't always add the stolen time to his personal stash. Sometimes he cashed it out, converted into money, coins or credits, ready for the next desperate soul. FD never would have gone to Big Kir if not for his mother's sudden sickness, but she was slowly going downhill with it, devouring every bit of savings, and he'd had to quit his job just to be able to take care of her. He figured he could earn the money back fast, sign up for one of the corpsling cleanup squads that kept Zarville borders from turning into mass graves. But he didn't make it in time. The airships from the 6th district, which was also plagued by the undead, swept in first and carpeted the whole horde with napalm. No horde, no cleanup. The recruiters just shrugged. After that, Cluster's old debt was his last shot, because you don't earn 1500 days in a night, not even slinging hot dust from the southern districts. FD still had maybe 150 credits left, plus some change rattling in his wallet. He could have blown it all on one last night of debauchery, burned through every bill just to keep it from going to the third eternal. When the life receiver activates, it doesn't just wipe out your remaining days. It clears out your bank accounts too, even physical cash, all of it becomes property of the creditor. But a proper binge required at least a spark of spirit, and FD didn't have anything left. Just the dull, depersonalizing weight of despair, pressing down on his bones like a wet mattress. Then something hit his eyes. A flash of color so sharp it cut through the haze. Sure thing, everything on level 5 was always flashing, glowing, shimmering. But this was different. This flash ripped through the usual blur. It was impossible to ignore. He looked up, and there it was. A massive sign pulsing with every color of the rainbow, and maybe 2 or 3 extras scientists hadn't figured out yet. Welcome to the casino Eternal Life. Who doesn't want to live forever? Bet a single day, win centuries. Instant payouts. FD shrugged. He'd never been much for gambling, though he knew the rules of most of the popular games. Too many people he knew had ended up ruined because of them, and left scraping by one day at a time, thanks to those very rules. But him, he had just one day left, a real one, not on paper, not on coin, just the last night of his life. So what did it matter where he spent it? They won't give him a credit, of course, but the cash in his pocket still legally belonged to him, for now. If he played small and didn't take stupid risks, maybe he could stretch it out. Maybe. He stepped toward the entrance. The door slid open without a sound, revealing the deep, inviting purple glow of the casino's womb. The casino swallowed him whole. The bleating of slot machines, the dry clatter of dice and the soft whisper of cards, the insect chatter of the roulette wheel, and the constant clicking of chips. Like 3 battalions of toy soldiers snapping miniature castanets in sync. Voices rose and fell around him, some calm, some tense, some bursting with the glee of a sudden jackpot, others soaked in the raw despair of a final lost bet. The air was thick with scent, alcohol, tobacco, expensive perfume, worn felt, and something else, something sharp and nervous, like ozone before the storm, the smell of gamble. Croupiers murmured in smooth, steady voices. Their voices were like old elevator music, always there, never changing. This was a universe where time didn't exist. And yet, time was the only thing you could win here, or lose. FD didn't even glance at the slots. Competing with a soulless machine for borrowed time seemed like the dumbest gamble of all. Roulette wasn't much better, just a fancier chaos dressed up in a chrome and velvet. No, he wanted at least some illusion of agency. One last lie he could tell himself about having control over the wreckage of his life. So he headed straight for the poker tables. Not the VIP ones buried deep inside, but the outer ring games, the ones with the lowest stakes. 5 players at the table. FD didn't bother looking at their faces. He slid into the empty seat and laid down 3 crisp 50-day notes, all he had left. The dealer nodded, exchanged them for chips, and said, "Texas Hold'em. Ante is 20 minutes." And just like that, the game began. At first, FD played mechanically, sticking to the simple rules Cluster, rest his soul, had once taught him. Don't bluff preflop unless you're holding something solid. Keep track of probabilities, even if only roughly. Never hand the pot to the small blind, just because everyone else folded. Ante, Fold, fold, raise. Turn and river, raise, showdown. Win. Fold, 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 loss, win. Gradually, he started to fall into rhythm. He picked up on the others' tactics, learned their habits, their tells, their weaknesses. Once he even went all in after catching 4 queens on the river. Nobody called him. No one wanted to see if he was bluffing. The chip pile grew. And as it did, his mind began to drift away from the reality of tomorrow's judgment, away from the ticking life receiver on his neck. He lost himself in the clean, hypnotic logic of it all. 2 of diamonds, 7 of spades. Someone doubles the bet, fold. A pair of tens. The flop drops another. Raise. 2 fold, 2 show. He wins. Garbage hand on the blind. Fold. Check, check, fold. Time was either rewinding or standing perfectly still. There was no way to tell. Casinos had no clocks. And Avdi wasn't in any hurry. The end of game would come for him whether he ran toward it or away. Players came and went. He played. Dealers rotated. He played. Every now and then he'd order a beer. Once or twice he got up to eat. Food and drinks were on the house. His mind had narrowed down completely, turned into a specialized software routine built only for one thing: the game. The real Avdi was somewhere else, in a coma of expectations, detached from the world, rehearsing oblivion. The whisper of cards, the soft slap of chips, the dealer's voice. Table talk from strangers he didn't look at. An eternity, packed into a single day. What pulled him out wasn't emotion. It was a touch. Someone was shaking his shoulder, gently but firmly. Avdi surfaced slowly, stared down at the green blur of the table against the vaguely purple haze of the walls. There were a lot of round, multicolored things stacked in neat towers on the table. They were all in front of him, and he was alone. "Excuse me, sir," said a voice right in his ear. Avdi thought it was the dealer at first, but when he turned his head he saw a well-dressed man in a sharp suit, wearing a badge that read, "Manager." "Apologies," the man said again, with a small respectful bow. "I'm afraid I must inform you that the casino will no longer allow you to place further bets." Avdi stared at him in confusion. No longer? Had he lost everything? Was that it? But then, why was the table still covered in stacks of chips? "Please allow me to congratulate you," the manager said. "You are the first guest in 5 years to reach the maximum permitted one-day winnings. 8,000. He smiled, polite and unreadable. "Your payout will be issued immediately. I sincerely hope you will consider becoming a regular guest at Eternal Life Casino." Avdi looked back and forth between the manager and the pile of chips, dumbfounded. 8,000 days? He'd managed to win 8,000 days? He could repay the debt? He could live? Suddenly it hit him like a jolt of electricity. Time! He'd been sitting here all night. Had to be. And at 9 a.m. sharp he was supposed to repay the third Eternal. He had to move now. What time is it? He gasped, grabbing the manager's immaculate lapel with desperate fingers. "It's 10:15 in the morning, sir," the manager replied smoothly, gently unhooking Avdi's hand from his suit. "We'll process your payout within minutes. In the meantime, May I offer you a glass of champagne to celebrate your remarkable achievement?" He nodded, and from behind him emerged the waiter carrying a tall glass on a silver tray. FD went cold. He was late. It didn't matter how much he'd won. He hadn't paid the debt in time. He was... Wait, that couldn't be. Then why he was still alive? His hand shot up to his neck. "We took the liberty of settling your debt to the esteemed Kirill Alexandrovich," the manager said with a faint smile, noticing Avdi rubbing his now bare neck. The life receiver was gone. "We did it in advance using your projected winnings, so you wouldn't be distracted from such an extraordinary game." He paused, watching Avdi's stunned expression. "This isn't standard procedure, of course, but Kirill Alexandrovich took a personal interest in your play and monitored your progress himself." A uniformed security officer stepped up beside the manager and whispered something in his ear. The manager nodded. "If you'd be so kind, please come with me. Your winnings are ready." He gestured with a grand sweep of his arm as though unveiling a stage. As they made their way through the casino, people began to stand. Gamblers, croupiers, servers, all of them rising at the sight of Avdi. Applause filled the room. Voices called out congratulations. A few even cheered "Bravo!" Gamblers always celebrate someone else's victory. After all, each of them harbored the same dream. One day, they would beat the house too. Avdi still couldn't quite grasp why they had to take him anywhere. Why not just cut him a check for 8,000? Well, 6.5 after the debt. A solid amount, sure, but hardly unheard of. Had no one really ever won that much before? He vaguely recalled the mountain of chips in front of him, but he hadn't the time to count, to estimate. Before he could dwell on it, the manager opened a set of heavy wooden doors. They stepped into a vast hall filled with people, rows of seats, like in a theater. But instead of facing a stage, they all looked upward, toward a small balcony 5 floors above. That was where the door had led. "That way, please," the manager repeated, and followed him out onto the balcony, gently closing the doors behind them. "You're winning, sir." Avdi looked at him, confused. The manager stepped to a small console and pressed a few buttons. "You have won 8,000 years," the manager said calmly. "By the rules of our establishment, all winnings must be paid out immediately. However, assembling a sum of that scale is not that easy." 8,000 years! Avdi stared at him. "Even Kirill Alexandrovich had to take certain measures to secure your payout," the manager went on, his gaze locked firmly on Avdi's. "But he was happy to make the effort." His hand rested lightly on a large red switch built into the console. That's when Avdi noticed. Every person seated in the hall below wore a life receiver around their neck. All of them. And deep in his gut, like a shard of dry ice scraping through his insides, something began to churn and twist, a sharp, burning dread. 8,000 years. Kirill Alexandrovich felt, the manager said, that it isn't every day an ordinary man earns a place beside the 5 Eternals, and so he chose to take a very personal interest in your fate. He smiled. Well then, your winnings are yours. He flipped the red switch. Everyone in the hall below instantly died. No, no, don't, please. I didn't want this. I didn't mean, don't. Avdi tried to scream, but the flood hit him first. A roaring surge of lives rushed into his body like fire through dry grass. He staggered, choking not on blood but on time, on years, on voices, on screams, on the end of everything those people had been or would have become. They died because he'd wanted to spend a miserable 150 credits, because he'd sat down to a game to kill some time. He wanted to say no, to sleep, to forget, to run from the flood, but he couldn't. He could never take it back. And he knew with every stolen breath, that this horror would haunt him for the rest of his monstrous life. All 8,000 years of it.